Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our August 23rd meeting of the North Kingstown School Department Building Subcommittee. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If anyone would like to speak in public comment, the sign-up sheet is up at the podium, so please sign up because that'll be the first item. And for our members, we're sending out an attendance sheet. Please be sure to sign that because I think we may be right at or one above quorum. So I just wanted to reflect that we did have a quorum. And I don't believe, I could save me from having to stand up, I don't believe anyone signed up for public comment. And is anyone in the public who would like to speak? Okay, excellent, thank you, Tim. The first order of business is to approve the previous meeting minutes of July 26th, 2023. Before we entertain a motion, I know the superintendent.
Yes, I'd just like to add something to the minutes under section 4, review purpose of the building subcommittee. I just would like it noted that Mr. Mollison and I had previous conversations regarding the purpose of the building subcommittee, and the purpose was something that we both had agreed upon. I just want that noted in the minutes for this last week.
So there's a motion in order to approve the minutes as amended.
Right.
Is there a motion?
No, I'm sorry.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent. The meeting minutes are approved. I will turn the next two items over to the superintendent.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is an update on the environmental study at the Davisville McGinn site. As everyone knows, we are performing a study there on the site to make sure that that land is usable to build a new middle school. So we do have a preliminary report to review for this evening to go over. Inga, do you want to go over there?
Sure.
I know we were hoping to have someone here
Yeah.
ready to hear
Well,
that so that we can.
it's in print. Do we print it? It's okay. We don't have to print it, but we can distribute it following this meeting. In high level, since I'm not an environmental engineer, there's no showstoppers. There's no anything that was sort of extremely alarming or out of ordinary. There are some findings that have to be mitigated through a standard process
So there was an old oil tank.
Oil
There was an
tank
oil
was
tank that
yes.
was taken out years ago on the site, and when that oil tank was removed, there was some leakage. Again, it's nothing that would get in the way of us using the site. There's just steps that we would have to go through with that area. Another factor that came out, again, not something that is of major concern at all, is that there was some fill used on the property. But what was reported to us that's very typical to find on a site, that there was some fill, but it's not something that would be of a concern for us.
And it is not uncommon to have those things in different sites. So, and there is a prescriptive process to go through it. If we do have our person coming, we can certainly circle back on any questions.
And with the oil tank, what we heard this morning is any remediation that would be necessary would happen during the demolition of the existing school, so it's on that parcel directly adjacent to the school. So the students would be in the new school, occupying the new school, and that remediation would happen at that time if necessary. And if Tim shows up, he can dig into more with any questions you guys might have.
And then the geotechnical boring, that's scheduled to take place on Monday. And we're ready to go, and I know Bob has been working with Adam and everyone at the school as well to have that completed around the properties that's happening in the fields as well as the parking lot. So we'll get more information once that's completed next week. But as of now, it's all good news for us that there's nothing that will get in the way of us using that site for construction. And we'll put this report up on the website so that way it's, so I was looking at Mike with things stepped up, but we'll have that up on the website. Questions or comments?
So just as a simple matter, the oil tank issue, I know you said it's not a major concern, but it's also something that wouldn't be addressed for several years until you get the school built. Is that right?
It was so it will be addressed as part of the permitting process. So it will be identified in stage 2 submissions as part of the site survey and investigation report. But the work that has to do with the tank and everything that has to do with that is going to be sort of like one of those pre-construction processes before we start constructing on site. So it is several years, a year and a half at least, depending on when.
And the oil tank that was removed, that was from 2006 and 2008, that was fully removed underground. So it's not on site anymore.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you said that there was something that would be addressed once the new school was built. I missing something.
If the soil's work still contaminated,
If
they found that soil was contaminated,
There's still
that it
a question
wasn't
of-
properly done
Yeah.
back in 2006, 2008, there could be a potential. The odds are it was inspected by DEM and they were part of the process. I did find paperwork in some of my files that explained, and I explained to the civil site engineer who was the engineer for that project back in 06, 08. So that I think they were going to reach out to that engineer as well, Robert Hoffman.
Thank you.
So, after the borings are done on Monday, like, what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? How many more tests have to be done? And at some point, do we have to send a recommendation to the school committee to say, this is the site we think we need to use, this is what we want to do? Like, what are those next steps? Because we've now got a vote on the books coming up in November. So how are we going to come up with some of these plans and information?
So
Do we want to start about this, Tim?
yeah, we can. I can answer. There is a phase 2 that is required under Rhode Island Safe School Siting Act that would be completed as well as next steps. But once we just answer your question, once this environmental study is done and we know that the land is usable, I think that would be that would be something that we agree upon here during that school committee. That Davisville McGinn site is the site that we would use to build the school.
And then how long before we get, I'm just thinking of like the marketing collateral that we're gonna need for this vote, like how soon are we gonna have stuff to be able to say, is it gonna be middle of September, end of September? The sooner the better, obviously, because again, we have this vote coming up and it's gonna be here before we know it.
Right. I mean, I would say we had a project team meeting today, a very lengthy project team meeting, outlining dates and meetings and all that we need to have scheduled. I would say by mid-September, we would have the information regarding the completion of the study, as well as more information that we would be able to share out as far as design of the middle school. So that's something that we are working on, continuing to work on, and we have a number of meetings that are set up for that purpose, and to be able to bring information back to this building.
It would be my opinion, and if the superintendent disagrees, I'd like to hear this. This actually goes back to, I think, the superintendent's amendment of the minutes. I think it would be my opinion that I'm of the impression the school committee has turned to the building committee and has said that they are interested in building one middle school at the Davisville Middle School site. And I would think the building committee's then responsibility is to report back to the school committee that this building is suitable. All of our tests are completed and is suitable for a middle school site, and the school committee would say, well, yes, this is the site we want to build a middle school. I don't think that would be the building committee. I think that we're doing our due diligence for you. We're the working committee, and we're going to present you the findings that, yes, this site is suitable. You would then decide, well, then we want to build a middle school there, and then we go forward. And as far as timing, and I know we talked about some forums, and I know we're looking at probably the end of September, mid to end of September for our first forum. And so I would think that as long as you've produced that finding well before then, so that when it's time for a rendering and whatnot, I think we're in pretty good shape. That's just my opinion. I'm not sure how the rest goes well.
And we're looking at trying to set up the schedule so that way, 1 week there's a school committee meeting, next week there's building committee, school committee, building committee, so that way every week we're able to have these conversations and bring information forward to the school committee. We do have our representative here, Tim. Can you
Sure.
pronounce your last name again?
Hi, Tim Thies.
Tim Thies. So Inga and I and Mike, we stepped in, we were just reviewing the report.
Sure.
But if you don't mind just going through that with us, and that way if anyone here has questions for you, they can ask.
Sure,
Absolutely. So, hello everybody, my name is Tim Thies. I'm Senior Vice President with Park Corporation, and we are the ones doing the environmental due diligence for the school site. We're working through it right now, we're not quite done, we're almost complete with it, but I'll share with you tonight some of our preliminary findings. And so, the environmental due diligence phase, it begins with what's called a phase 1 environmental site assessment, and this is standard practice for just about every project that's going to be doing construction, property transfers. It's a very standard practice. It includes primarily a records review. We look at historical records for the site, we look at any files the state might have, the Department of Environmental Management, what they might have for the site. We look at local records for the site. We look at historical records, historical aerials, sandborne maps, any historical data we can get about the site. We'll do a site walk as part of it, and we'll interview anybody we can really talk to that knows the history of the site. Right? So it's a records review. It's not soil sampling, it's not groundwater sampling. We don't do any lab analysis at this point. It's entirely a records review with a site walk and some interviews. Again, it's a standard practice outline in what's called ASTM. So we're just about done with it, and so far we're pleased with the findings. We have not found anything so far that is overly alarming about the site. Okay, pretty typical. Our findings so far are pretty typical of a school site of about this age. Okay, we've identified maybe 2 or 3 items that represent a potential environmental issue, and I'll walk you through what those 2 or 3 items are. The most acute of which is there used to be an underground storage tank on the site. It was removed in 2008. At that time, when they did the removal, they did identify that the tank had leaked to some degree in that area. We believe that they did a cleanup at that time. That when they pulled it out, they did the cleanup at the same time. They reported it to the state required the cleanup. We believe it was all done. The issue is that the state's file is incomplete on this particular item, right? So we weren't able to review the entirety of the file. So that last piece that talks about the cleanup was not available for us to review. So that's an issue that we'll have to get worked through as we move forward with the project. Essentially, either we'll have to get our hands on that closure assessment so we can figure out exactly what was left in the ground, if anything, or additional investigation will have to be done to assess if there is any petroleum left in the ground where that tank was. So that was, like I said, that's probably the most acute issue, meaning the thing that we can point to and say, hey, there was an environmental issue right here. The rest of what we found is more circumstantial. Okay, specifically, in some of our review of the topography of the site, some historical aerials, some old topographic maps, it looks like there was probably some imported fill brought to the site. We're talking basically dirt brought to the site. We don't know that the dirt has anything in it in terms of contaminants, but we also don't know that it doesn't have anything, right? So anytime fill is brought to a site from an unknown location, an unknown source, we flag it as a potential issue, something that will need to be investigated, just to rule out any potential issues with that fill material. Okay? And then the other one was that the site, prior to being a school, had been used for agricultural purposes. Agriculture in and of itself is not an issue, but on those kinds of sites, they use pesticides and herbicides, some of which had lead and arsenic in them. Some agricultural sites used a pesticide called lead arsenate, right? Primarily lead and arsenic. Agricultural sites that used that pesticide have a legacy of having lead and arsenic in the soil, many years after the use of that material. We don't know that that was used at this site, but again, we don't know that it wasn't used at this site. So the fact that it was an agricultural site is something that we will want to investigate further on the site. But in terms of potential environmental issues, that's really all we have found so far for the site. There's an above ground storage tank that was put on top of essentially the grave of where the underground storage tank was. It's no longer in use, is our understanding. If it had leaked, and we don't believe that it ever leaked, but if it had, when we investigate for the old underground storage tank, we would be doing it at the same time for the above ground. So that's not really a significant issue. So that's really it. It's really the underground storage tank so far. the potential use of pesticides on the site in the past, and possibly some fill that we might find when we're out there digging. That's what we have found so far.
I have a couple, I have one question, but it's actually to numbers 2 and 3.
Okay.
When we're talking about the fill may have been imported in agriculture, is that the entire, I think it's roughly 48-acre site, or are you looking at just where the footprint of the building would be?
So we look at the entirety of the site, the parcels, when we do this. But when we start to focus in on where our phase 2 will be, and that will be the next investigation, we tend to focus on just where we're going to be doing activity, where we're going to be disturbing soil, and where people might be in the future. So it doesn't mean, so if we found something, we say, hey, we think there might be fill way off in that corner where no one's ever going to be and we're not going to touch, we don't necessarily have to investigate that. But when we do the phase 1, we do it for the entire parcel.
And the phase 2 ESA happens before or after the RIDE stage 2 submission? Do you remember?
We have done it both ways. Quite frankly, we've gotten involved in some projects that were very late in getting their environmental work done, where we were actually doing the due diligence right before construction. Right, and I'm not suggesting that we should ever do that, but so it can happen. There's a lot of places during the process where it can happen. Obviously, the earlier in the process, the better. These issues that I'm outlining here, if they do turn out to be issues, they become soil management issues, right? And any soil management issue that you're going to have on site, you're going to want to get that, identified, delineated, quantified, so that it can get into the bid. Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have to find something during construction, obviously, that you didn't know about, and then have to deal with it during construction. It's a change order. So the earlier in the process that you can do it, the better.
Thank you.
How relevant the remediation of all these issues is for the bond? Meaning, assuming that the entire site needs to be remediated, that, if I understand correctly, that means removal.
Not necessarily removal. Removal is one option. If we find something, depending on the degree that we find it, and I'll just, for argument's sake, let's say we find arsenic on site, just for argument's sake. Depending on the concentration, we may be able to leave it on site, but put what's called an engineered control over it. Essentially, cap it with cleaner soil to prevent any exposure to that buried arsenic. So that would not necessarily require removal. We could cap
Even
it.
if you cap it, you have to go down to a certain level before you cap it off.
Well,
You have to,
yeah, there's earthwork that has to be done. Yeah.
I guess the question I'm trying to say is how much that is going to affect the cost of.
It's a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer because we're so early in this.
No, I get it. That's why I was asking if we are going to have some information before the bond, because the way I see it, all that cost is going to have to be added to the construction. We are not talking about just a small portion. If the whole site is affected by this field, including the old tank or whatever, we are talking about, I can see kind of some numbers over there.
Yeah, I mean, again, for argument's sake, say we did have a significant amount of material we had to remove from the site. You're right, that would get very costly. So we try to work with the designers and the site work designers specifically to identify ways to keep that material on site so it doesn't have to leave the site. Because it can get very expensive. Even at low concentrations, if you have to remove it from the site, it can get very expensive. But in terms of what those dollars would be right now, unfortunately, I just don't know.
That's that kind of information will be provided before or after the bond.
I apologize, I missed the beginning conversation about the schedule. I mean, we can start to get an understanding of that relatively soon. We would have to do test pits, soil borings, collect those kinds of soil samples to understand if it's even there. But once we do that, we can work with the site work or the site engineers to try to come up with some quantities of material that might have to leave. The best that you're going to do at this early stage is try to set an allowance aside to handle this kind of issue during construction. Not identified during construction, but allow some latitude in the project budget to handle environmental issues.
Does the fact that there's a school on the site already mean anything?
Well, I mean, frankly, and not to sound glib, it's better than if it weren't a school. It's better than if it were an industrial site, right? I mean, schools are low intensity uses in terms of contaminants, but not zero intensity. There are some septic systems out here that are, hooked up to the building plumbing. There's labs in the building. There's potential that stuff made it out into the septic system that will have to get addressed. But it's not a high intensity use in terms of contaminants. It's not like an industrial site or commercial site. So that is a good thing overall. Yeah, it's better than some we've seen, quite frankly.
Mr. Thies, the bond vote is November the 7th. You said that this process could be accomplished, at least the preliminary portion, fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Given that you know that there's a vote in early November, when do you think you might have some information?
If we could get out there in September to do some of this investigation, we could have some of these preliminary data in September, beginning of October.
So well in advance of the vote.
I think so. Again, that presumes that we can get out there in September, that we can get a driller and do the work.
In your experience, worst case scenario, how much are we talking about in terms of money?
It varies so much from school to school. It's really hard to say. I mean, it could be very, very little. It could be a few thousand. It could be, and I'm not saying this to scare you, but on another school, we had $1 million of fill we had to remove from the site because there was no place on the site to keep it. It was a very small footprint. They couldn't keep it on site.
As you sit here now, you have no idea what it could be.
Yeah, it could be right.
And we have borings scheduled for next week, so that's gonna provide us more information as far as what is underneath the surface.
Exactly. So that those borings will serve as a very good first step to identify if fill exists on site, if this foreign material exists on site. That'll be a very good first step.
We'll have that information, and that information will give us, can tell us our next steps if we have to do any further steps.
Yep.
Are those borings for compaction, or are you taking soil and groundwater samples?
Those are primarily geotechnical, but we do like to collect samples when we do the geotechnical. Essentially, kill two birds with one stone.
Just a point of information for the committee as we're talking, and everybody involved as we're talking about all this. Early voting starts October 18th. So while the election is indeed in November, whenever we can gather information prior to October 18th, I think it benefits the general public, so that way nobody can be questioned. So doesn't mean it has to be that way. Things happen from early voting day to actual election day, but anything we can do prior to that, I think is beneficial to the public.
I may add on the budget side, well, once we know, we don't even have to know, we can discuss like the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. We already have preliminary budget that was somewhat developed. Obviously, it has to be redone and reworked based on the actual site and the design, but we can see what the budget impact is. And based on the allowances that were already allocated towards that, within that number that was circulated, the 167, which I'm hoping actually comes below that site remediation should be within that allowance. And we can definitely investigate and look into what that is prior to the bond.
The other thing I was thinking is how bad will the impact on the structural integrity of the ground could that be?
It's another good question. So if we have fill material, aside from potential contamination, if we have fill material and we deem it to be structurally unsuitable, they may have to come out from underneath the building. I mean, again, aside from any contaminants, if it's not good material, it's not good material.
Because that would be, I believe it can have also kind of a big impact also on the cost if we need to start using different methods.
So on the investigation, we'll have to do an investigation out here. I say there will have to be an investigation out here, a phase 2 we call it, for 2 reasons. 1, to investigate these findings, and 2, because the school siting law, I think I've heard somebody say, the school siting law requires it. The school siting requires a fairly vigorous investigation of soil and groundwater on the site. The school siting law really concerns itself with potential vapor intrusion into buildings, where kids are going to be. And so they want to make sure that any new school buildings, even school buildings built on school sites that already have schools on them, that there are not going to be vapors in the school building, right? And so they require soil and groundwater testing as well as vapor testing, just to make sure of that. So that phase 2 work that's going to happen, like I said, is going to serve 2 purposes: to investigate these issues and to satisfy the school site requirements. Just to clarify how those two interplay.
And how soon can we schedule stage 2?
The phase 2.
The phase 2. Sorry. Stage 2.
So we can do things a little bit out of order. And the reason I say that is because the way the school siting law wants you to do it, they want you to do the phase 1, which you're doing right now. And then you have to have a public meeting. And the public meeting has to be advertised so many days ahead of time, and you have to send mailings to abutters. And it has to be advertised specifically for the purposes of gathering information about environmental conditions on the site. Okay? It's a data gathering exercise. It's not meant to be alarming to any of the abutters. It's a data gathering exercise. And they want that public meeting to help inform where and what, where you do the phase 2 and what you sample for, what you look for as part of phase 2, right? We know what we know about the site from the records we reviewed. There might be somebody in town who says, "Oh, I remember my grandfather used to bury old Chevys out the back there. They're still out there." Right? So we want to try to get that kind of information, and then we schedule the phase 2. We have in the past done them a little bit out of order, and there's a risk to that, right? Where we've gone out, we've done, we'll say, a preliminary phase 2, and then had the public meeting. And in the event that something comes out of the public meeting that we did not investigate, right? Somebody says, "Hey, I knew about this thing in the back, and you guys never looked at that," we would have to go back out and reinvestigate that, whatever that issue is, or that part of the site. But it does at least get you a sort of a preview look at what's going on the site. So we've done them out of order. It's not recommended, but we have done them out of order. If we followed the order, we would be out there. We could advertise for the public meeting. It takes about 2 weeks to get that advertised and scheduled, right? We need a place to do it. We have to give abutters a certain amount of days notice. So we're probably in the middle of September for that meeting. And then once that meeting happens, we could be out there the following week. Assuming we get it wrong.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Dees.
You're welcome.
I guess we'll follow up
Yeah.
tomorrow. Get it set. The next item on the agenda is to have a discussion on our capital improvement plan and priorities for the 5-year capital improvement plan that we need to submit with the upcoming budget for next year. The current capital improvement plan that we do have in place, we received an extension from RIDE to use, and that was the plan that was submitted with last year's budget. And that 5-year plan is what is in place still right now. But the work that we have started doing on our end, at the school end, through our administration team, is to start using a facilities assessment that was completed just to identify the work. So right now, there's no major projects scheduled for this fiscal year, but we know the budget process needs to start soon. The school year starts in September, and then by end of October, you're starting to build your budget for the following year. So that's going to be happening very soon, but we're also wanting to get ahead with the capital improvement plan. We'll have to submit with that. And one of the responsibilities within the school building committee, and I followed the same work with our building facilities committee in Jamestown, is that recommendations come from this committee to us to build that capital improvement plan to submit to the school committee. So Mr. Waterman has the assessment that we received, and he's just going to review what that assessment is, and then we have copies for everyone so we can go through that this year.
Thank you. So Rouse is the architect who is hired to update the facility condition assessment. So what you have in front of you on the screen or on the thick packet in front of you is that assessment. Anything that's highlighted in green is work that was accomplished from the previous assessment. So we won't spend too much time on the green because that's work that was accomplished. Then as you scroll through it, you will see in this column right here, column J, you'll see LEA assessment priority. So anything that's a priority 1 or 2 is health and safety. So the sheets in front of you are broken down by priority level that was established between Bob Parenti, myself, and the architect. 1s and 2s, again, health and safety, then 3, 4, and 5. Generally, 5 is stuff that can be done in-house. That's some of your lower hanging fruit. 3 and 4, sometimes you might bundle those projects across schools. So if there's sidewalks that need to be repaired, or asphalt that needs to be done, you might do that across a number of schools, so it's a one project. So just because this is a starting point for us, just because something's a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that's not etched in stone anywhere. That's part of what this exercise is. This is kind of our head start thinking, and you'll kind of see the important of it. So, the first number 1 here is leaks. So these are specific areas where leaking was either observed or damage from leaking was observed. So this item, and what you'll see as you go through this is some stuff may know paint from water. Well, that's attributed to a roof leak. So it may be, the overgeneralization of roof leak, but there might be many lines of evidence that say that there is a roof leak. So you've got a roof leak, cracks in the slab, and again, this is one. Cracks in the slab and the joints in the concrete slab. So this is listed twice, but it's really the same issue. What I'm just going to talk about having to replace floor tile because in order to get to the cracks in the slab, you need to plug the floor tile. So I'm not sure how we want to go through this. Do we want to go line by line? Do we want to?
I think the best thing, just because of timing, we know this could take us a very long time going through each school. So my kind of vision of what we would do here at this meeting is to look at the 1s and the 2s at each building. And then as committee members, we have this information to take home, because otherwise we could be here for 5 hours going through this tonight. But to be able to take the information back home, review it, and we're going to start building what that capital improvement plan will be and what we want to submit as priorities. And of course, in creating that plan, we also have to consider the financial costs, right? So we can't just say, okay, we're going to do all the ones in next year. It's not possible. So we need to prioritize what needs to happen. And so tonight we'll go through the 1s and 2s. After the meeting, asking the committee to take this back, review it, and prior to our next meeting, just to email myself or Mr. Borderman any concerns that you see in here or priorities or your viewing from your position and your expertise of sitting on this committee as something that you believe should be noted as a priority for us. And what we're going to start doing is we're going to start creating that capital improvement plan to then share with you as well.
And that plan is what ultimately gets submitted to RIDE and how we get reimbursement for projects. So, for example, at the high school, we put the refurbishment of the softball field in there. It's not a health and safety. I guess you could argue it's safety. The field is unplayable. They play at other locations. But we wanted that project to appear on this list so that if any portion of it is reimbursable, by putting it on our capital improvement plan, we can apply for reimbursement. Generally, athletic fields aren't, but if we were to do some other upgrades to netting and fencing, some of that may be eligible. So
let's note those. So this is the high school, right? So let's note the 1s at North Kingstown High School. We'll start there.
Sorry, what did you say? EA. What stands for?
Which
LEA.
Local Educational Agency. So that's basically this one. So in looking at the ones at the high school, you've got damage due to roof leaks. So we wouldn't fix the damage until we fix the roof leak. Obviously, if there's a ceiling tile that's gonna fall down, we'll replace that. But, you know, if paint is gonna keep bubbling up because there's a leak, we wanna fix the leak before we start putting the part walls. So you've got roof leaks, you've got the cracks in the concrete slab by the back part of the gymnasium, correct, Bob?
Yes.
And then the railing in the balcony of the auditorium, if you've been up there, it goes up to about 90. So it's only a couple feet high. So, that is a safety concern. So, and I'll scroll down a little bit for the sake of the TV.
So just looking at this and looking at the cost, if we replace the roof, that takes care of some of the other concerns.
So correct. So if you look at here, you can see this is remove and replace the roof at the building. That will address these concerns up here.
And so just in reading the report, it gives an estimated cost of the LEA estimated construction cost, and then it shows what that cost would be if you made suggestions of what you would do.
Correct. So that's exactly where I was going to get to. So the cost was when they submitted this, they estimated the cost would be at approximately $6.6 million for the high school roof. However, if you look under the 5-year plan, depending on where that number comes in, they've put in an estimated cost escalation because the cost of stuff just keeps going. So that is estimated at 7.4 if you were to do it in 2024. If you were to do it in 2025, the cost could be higher. Now, that's using tools that's not getting an actual bid process out there. So
it's already been determined that it will not be addressed in fiscal year 24.
Correct.
So we know that if we're going to do it, we have to put an escalation for fiscal year 25.
So this for 25, correct. And I believe, I'm not sure because this is a copy. I know the original one, if you pop in the number, yeah. So in the original one, if you popped in the number, it would do it. But this was a copy, so I'm thinking the formula was different.
They're only projection.
Correct. I mean, to get the price, you've got to bid on the project.
So for example, again, just one quick question, I think I know the answer, but it's worth a dialogue. So replacing the roof is at 6.6 million. Was it 6.6 million? Do we know what year it was priced out at 6.6 million?
As of when this report, they did the cost estimates in the spring.
So the reason why I say that is because if it was priced out as of the spring of 23, fiscal year 24 is just 12 months later, and yet you have an escalation of well over 10%.
Yeah.
Was that?
9%.
It's actually more than that.
Maybe with more.
Because 10% would be 666,000 in.
Closer to 8.
Yeah, no, it's about 11 or 12.
You say
800, yes, it's about 11 or 12%. And so again, as going through this, in order for someone like myself to give you recommendations, I have to ask the question, how do we get a 12% escalation in a matter of potentially 4 to 16 months? Because if this was done in the spring, fiscal year 24 starts July 1 of 23.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a 12% escalation in a matter of 4 to 16 months.
So I can check with the architects to find out what their escalation number is for each year.
It's about 12%. They're all pretty accurate when you look at it. Just to let you know, if it's 200,223, that's about 12%. 22,024, that's about 12%. It seems like they're pretty accurate. It's a 12% number. Just seems like a high escalation, but
I would
for a 4-month project or a 16-month project, worst case scenario. But sorry, go ahead.
And so what you'll see, what they did for this sheet, they're kind of marking this like as if this was the final. So they put all the priority ones you want to do right away. The priority twos, as we scroll down, you'll see they put that in year 2. Priority 3s in year 3. Right. So, but I can get more information as to who did their cost estimation, because there are companies out there that do the cost estimates. If I was to do this now, or if I was to do the project now, what's the cost versus if I was to do it, they could have been looking at 12 months, they could have been looking at FY 24, but, if they did this in March of 23, what's the March of 24 cost?
And the reason why I asked that is because that would be important, because if that's what you just said is true, then fiscal year 25, we wouldn't have to add a significant escalation. So that's really only 4 months later from the number they gave there. So that's why that would be helpful.
So the value we're estimating is, we estimate right now roughly 6% to midpoint of construction. So I guess depends what they used for that midpoint for each project would determine that. So this may look like it's 2024, but it depends how the construction duration is.
Sure.
So if it's a 2-year process, then maybe that is why the escalation is higher. It's at 6% per year to midpoint.
So under that scenario, under a stage 2, and I don't know the answer to this, being that it's 7.4, wouldn't you put 3.7 million to fiscal year 24 and 3.7 million to fiscal year 25, or is that not how it's done? Because of your situation, under your definite explanation, if it takes more than one fiscal year to construct it, why wouldn't you spread the funding out over 2 fiscal years, or is that not how you do a stage 2?
So it depends. Stage 2 is different than this, so it depends how you want to look at it. So stage 2 application to RIDE, we don't necessarily have to give them this. We just give them the budgeting plan and specific estimates per project. How you want to see it on your projection, you could show it as a lump sum, because it depends how you buy it, right, and how you pay for it. If you want to see it 50%, 50% or actual, so it's kind of like a cash flow, right?
Yes.
That's that projection, that's one way. For how you appropriate your funds, that's another way. Or if you want to just put it all because you're assuming you're going to appropriate your funds in the beginning, that's one way to do it. But the escalation is determined in the budgeting process.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
When did you say this was done in terms of, when did they give you the pricing?
The price. So we received this report on June 22nd. They sent it out to the cost estimators. I'm going to say around February, March timeframe.
Okay, so they already figured out their price based on like the air conditioning work that was done last year and stuff like that.
So these are the 3 priority ones for the high school in terms of So going to the 2s, you'll see, and then again, this is where you start talking about combining projects. Remove portable AC system in IT rooms, install dedicated touchless split AC unit at each location. That's actually tied into, if you look, it's tied into a number of other HVAC projects. So is doing the IT room of high importance? No, in and of itself. But if you're doing other HVAC work, now that's the time to add a drop or a heading, because you're already there doing it. So the first 3 lines are all HVAC, and then Bob, I'm gonna let you take over on this. The ERB. Something we were just talking about this one.
So the ERB is just the energy recovery. So it's more energy related than it is anything. We added them in a few schools, and we've seen that actually when I saw the difference today at Hamilton, it really makes a difference in the temperature of the room when you don't have cooling. So it's recirculating some air from inside and some air from outside, mixing it together. Its energy recovery is more about energy savings than tempering air. That's for sure. So that was added. Is that one of the gray ones, Mike? Oh, yeah.
Correct.
That was just added in this last go round. So it wasn't in the first 5-year SIP that we had. That was a new find.
Thank you for pointing that out. What Bob's referencing is Green is work that was completed. White is stuff that was on a previous assessment. And gray, so line 35 and 36 in there, those are new items that we discovered in the most recent one. So that's it for the twos at the high school. Questions on that, or is it move on to Tony? And you will note the recurring theme when it comes to groups, that's gonna be a one on many of our buildings. So we've got, again, the roof at Stony Lane, as well as a gap in the skylight, which is a potential leak, which will be fixed off, correct?
Yes, it's part of the
Which
process.
will be fixed as part of the review. And then, a security vestibule for the main office area, or entry to the school. And then, we currently have one, HVAC room that needs to be replaced.
Can you elaborate on the security vestibule?
So this would be installing, they're called a number of names, a sally port, a main trap, a lockout. So this would be installing some type of.
We don't have that at Stony Lane.
We don't. What we have at Stony Lane is we have a buzz at the main door, and then we have the entrances to the open spaces all that are closed off.
Can you think of any other schools that don't have this?
That's gonna come up.
Do you know off the top of your head how many? I know we're gonna go through it, but just.
Fishing Cove,
Yeah,
Yes,
with the-
PA, Vanessa.
To do all four, you're probably looking at.
So one of the things we have to go back to is we have to ask the architect, because this one they've got associated at roughly $50,000. But at Quinnesset, which is very similar, is a much different number. So we're not sure, was there a typo when they're entering it in? So I would think it's probably closer to this $50,000 number.
And do you know if this is something that could be, I don't want to go off topic, but do you know if this is something that could be handled while the kids are in school? Does it have to be handled at some vacation, an equal vacation, a Christmas vacation?
I think it would have to be done because it's the main entrance to the building. And part of your 50% of your egress has to go out that front door in an emergency by code. I don't think we could tackle it during the school, but I think on a week off, if they prepped it correctly and did it out of storefront material like you would see at a CVS, it's like that at Hamilton and multiple schools. If they had pre-made everything and ready to go, they could do it in a week.
So if the building committee doesn't mind, if I could put on my other hat for 30 seconds, if you could, if we as a building committee could put this together and get this over to the town council and myself first, and all of them as soon as possible, within this day and age, in such a low ticket item, I think that we potentially could look at offer a fund balance or something to tackle something like that. Maybe something like this fall through the cracks and us, wish that we did something. So that's to the building committee, but I don't know if the building committee make that call. That's a school committee decision, not ours, but we want to recommend it to them. Before we can do that, we need your information. So if it's, I just think it's something that, as I'm wearing my other hat, I think it's something that I'd love to join the school committee, the council line, and prioritize it. But yeah, sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
And so the last item was one of the two HVAC units at the Stone Gym needs to be replaced. Our concern there is both units were put in at the same time, same age. One of them is failed to be repaired. So
they're obsolete. We're struggling to even get parts for them.
So one needs to be done. Two should be done.
Before we move on to Tuesday, Mayor's last one there, a question I have regarding the roof and the skylight, since that's a new, right, so the gray is anything that's newly valued in this assessment. Is that an area that's already leaking?
No.
So I'm just looking at the cost, it's such a low
Yes,
cost
it's
item, is that something that we should?
It's potential for leak.
Okay.
We could certainly tackle it now. We've made mandates to it already to have it patched, but truly you need to replace everything. You're working just with, I think that roof is 22 years old.
It has, so the addition looks like it was 96 and the original 71.
Yeah, but
Sure,
that's,
the roof has been
that's the
replaced.
age of the building, not the age of the roof. So it's not leaking. To answer your question.
And then our number 2 has to do with ADA access. Replacement of windows, door and window caulking. And then Bob, I'm gonna let you talk to the third one, which is the controls and maybe some of the ones we're looking at.
Okay, so the control packages that are shown on here, that's one of my big things. The previous 2 districts, I did put packages together to redo controls throughout all the buildings. Right now, most of our buildings, believe it or not, are pneumatically controlled, so they're controlled by air and not wired thermostats or wired controls. It's actually air lines running from room to room. And as we all know about air, it leaks out of every little spot you can find. So that it's very energy inefficient. So I'm working with a couple of different groups to put together packages to bring forward to everybody of what it would cost for each building to be brought to today's standard, right? To be on a BMS system, have controls for the heating systems, with potential to tie in ventilation fans and any other thing we want to tie in to monitor generators, things like that. So that's what the controls are. And then part of putting in new controls is the commissioning. Same with if we add AC in an IT room, RIDE requires a commissioning agent to commission all the new equipment, no matter what it is. It's crazy, but that's what they do. So that's what some of those other smaller things are. Kitchen exhaust fans, again, I think I'm not as familiar with that system as the kitchen staff are, but I believe that's to get it so it's more energy efficient. It's just, those systems are original to all of our buildings. So all the exhaust systems in the kitchens are pretty old.
So is that also, would they need to be replaced to be compatible with the
Not necessarily. A lot of the stuff now, I mean, you're replacing a motor, right? That motor can be connected into the BMS system. It should just monitoring the usage of that, the drawer of that motor. And then you can tell if it's drawing too much, too little, running hot. There's so many different things they can monitor with a BMS system.
Questions on storyline? Next up is Crescent. Top of the list is a roof, and then here's where I mentioned what we believe to be the typo, which is the security vestibule. Like Crescent is costing $13,000. I wondered when we were entering it 4 into 1. So those are the ones that Crescent. Moving on to the 2s. Again, you have ADA access. You have windows. So very similar to Stony Lane. Replacing windows, doors, gaskets, window with door gaskets. You get the controls again. And then some air handling units, as well as all the other associated fees, recommissioning. On this one, that's different from Stony Lane is we put on adding a new generator. So this is one of our schools that does not have a generator, so this would be installing a new generator. And some more HVAC.
So when we were originally looking at putting the middle school here, this school was going to go away. So what is the plan now with the elementary schools as to which one you would take offline, just to know, or isn't that plan around yet?
So I will say right now, the conversations we are having, just at the school level, is not taking any of the schools offline. I don't think we're at that point where we can say that. My understanding is that Knesset would have been demolished because the middle school is going there. But we're looking at the projections, conversation we have today, pretty much every single day we're meeting up just to be able to get this work done. So right now, we're not looking at taking a school with the capacity currently we have at the buildings, this elementary school buildings. I want to be really careful at saying that we're going to take a school offline before we know for sure, because of the overcrowding that we have at Hamilton right now, at Forest Park. Knesset, Stony Lane have space. Fishing Grove has some space, but we really need to look at what we want to do about programming across the district as well before we say that it goes.
Any other questions on Knesset? Next up is Forest Park. And our ones here are the roof and the fire alarm system. Bob, can you talk to the fire alarm system?
Forest Park?
Forest Park.
No, I think we need to circle back on that one.
Okay.
I think,
Just get copied over.
yeah, I think it might have been copied over. The reread is there, and I believe that was a brand new system. It was Hamilton that has the.
Hamilton is definitely should be in the fire alarm. So we'll circle back to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I believe that one was done.
Okay.
Now that you and I were just there.
So our ones in the roof and possibly fire alarm system, we will certainly get back on that one. And then for twos, we have window gaskets, the controls, ADA plumbing upgrades, and then some electrical panel upgrades, as well as this is another one of our schools without a generator. So those are ones and twos at Forest Park. Hamilton, a roof, and the fire alarm system are our top priorities there, are number ones. So number two are ADA access. The main lobby is not a true security interlock. There's a little bit of work that needs to be done there to really mark it off. ADA door access, the BMS controls, some more ADA plumbing fixtures, and then some more electrical upgrades. The remove and replace generator cost, we think is a typo. It's $750,000. That is certainly a typo. Because as we know, the transfer switch at Hamilton is brand new. There was a pole strike.
No, there was a meltdown in the transformer at the time. National Grid's transformer melted down, leaked out all its oil, and it caused a short within our building and fried the transfer switch. So it was replaced brand new.
So those are our ones and twos at Hamilton. Bishop Code, anyone want to guess a one? Roof. So Bishop Code, we have the roof and security vestibule as mentioned earlier. And for twos, we have ADA access. I'll let you talk to the crack in the CMU. Continuing to say what a CMU is for those that don't know.
All right, so it's where I come from, it's a concrete masonry unit. It's a block. It's a cement block. But what it is on the newer addition on the south end of the building, the south end of the building, there's literally a crack in the building where the stairway is. It looks like the stairway kind of settled and it sent a good structural crack right up through the stairwell. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. It's been noted, the structural engineer didn't say it was an emergency and needed to be addressed tomorrow, but said that it needed to be addressed. Water penetrations, ice, that type of stuff. We saw the same thing at Hamilton already, where water penetrated and each block out.
Where was that? That should,
It was in there.
did I skip it?
It was in there. Yeah.
You've got the controls and then some HVAC work, exhaust fans, unit heaters. Some ADA plumbing fixtures, existing panel board, and then this is another one of our schools without generators. Excuse me. Any questions on fishing code? Davisville Academy, the roof. Can you talk to the platform that's on the roof? Is that just replacing the wooden
Yes.
slat? So
It's removing a wooden ladder assembly and putting in steel. That's really what it comes down to.
and is that to access the HVAC equipment on the roof? So if you're on one side of it, you need to
We did it at Hamilton. You can see it when you pull in the parking lot. There's a metal set of stairs that go up and over the duct and the heating unit. Literally, when you pull in it, you look up, you can see it. So it's the same scenario there.
I'm going to piggyback on Councilperson Page's comments on the Davisville Academy, because I know there's been some discussion about, again, my discussion about potentially moving the students back into the population of schools, having an administrative place somewhere where all administration is under one roof. So it would be good to know what the school committee's thoughts are on Davisville. And then again, just for my understanding of stage 2, and I know I have the understanding of the school committee and the superintendent and all of you, is that by putting it on there, it's not a bad thing. So the building committee should probably still put it on there. That way, if we do something, we get reimbursed. But for future thoughts, we may want to not prioritize this if we're thinking of not utilizing this building 4 or 5 years from now. But again, I understand your thought process, by putting it in stage 2, that way, in case we do something, we get reimbursed. Is that correct?
But correct me if I'm wrong, that's not considered a school. In the eyes of RIDE, it's not considered a school, or is it considered a school? Because if it's not, then we don't get reimbursed.
It's a school building, and it's an educational placement. So the kids who are enrolled in Davisville Academy are enrolled in their home school, but their educational placement is at Davisville.
So do we get reimbursed on
That
that?
sounds like we would, but wouldn't we?
Yeah, if it's
Bingo.
part of your jurisdiction and it's part of public school system.
So we're still using it as a school. It's not,
I
it's
don't
not a
see
school,
why it wasn't.
it's not a standalone school according to RIDE when you look at our schools.
Yeah.
It is exactly what you said, but the building is still being used for educational purposes. And I agree with what you're saying. We need to prioritize what buildings we're going to focus on, and we do want to have those conversations about the academy. Do we keep it the way it is as a clinical day program? Or do we need to look at programming and where that programming in the future should be back at elementary or high schools? And so as we prioritize the needs, it would be foolish not to include those academy in possible work that's needed, but it wouldn't be a priority right now as far as like if there's work that needs to get done next year. Unless there's something that in my opinion, has to do with safety and security for the students.
So based on that, let me ask a stage 2 question, because you would know this. So let's say the school committee or the building committee put Davisville Academy as funding for fiscal year 27. But in fiscal year 25, we said, oh, we have to do this. We still get reimbursed?
Yeah, as long as you do it within your 5 years.
Okay.
Then So basically what you're saying is when you submit your stage 2, you're outlining the work that needs to be done. If we go out of order, meaning we put something on that you're saying, but
The roof fails tomorrow, we still get reimbursed.
you have to do that work within 5 years, and you have to do 50% of the work to be successful.
And that scenario makes sense to include it. Gotcha. Okay.
So the security vestibule and the ladder and the roof were the priority 1s. Go to priority 2, you've got the building management system, the energy recovery.
Yep.
then it looks like some of the work that goes along with exterior floodlights in the play area. Oh, so, sorry, I was just saying, went to the trees. Replacing some electrical panels, and this is another power generator. Questions on DA?
So the going rate on all generators is $135,000.
Yes, and that's somewhat in line with what, with what we had a generator installed at the B building, and that's in line with, it was right around 290, 100,000 a couple of years ago, so that's kind of right in line with the installation. Whitford Middle School. First item is a roof. This is another building without a true security vestibule. And what I want to point out is, in all of our buildings, we've taken as many steps as we can to provide. So, for example, at Whitford Middle School, you can buzz on the front door when you go up the stairs to get into the to get into the hallway from the main lobby. There's another set of doors that you have to buzz through. So, if someone's able to get through the first set, there's generally a second set that they would have to get to before they come in. Whitford Middle, there is a gymnasium there, but those doors are shut. But this is obviously another opportunity for security. Building ventilation, and I think what you're going to see here is, because this project did go out to bid, this is one of the first projects that this building committee talked about, was the building ventilation back in January, and the price was significantly higher than that. But I think this is going to be one of the things where you see there's multiple components to the building ventilation that ultimately builds up to that larger number. So our priority twos, ADA accessibility, these first two items, replacement of windows, these are all windows that are scrolling through. Replacement of the partition that divides the gymnasium in half. The removal and replacement of the floor that work for middle.
Those are windows replacements.
Yep. So here's some more of the HVAC stuff that would be tied into the
System,
Yep, that would be tied into the building ventilation. Mixing balance plumbing.
Like, where there's blue, what is the blue for?
Look, this highlight here,
Yes. Is that on the description?
how do you recall? You know what, I think the blue is, so the blue is tied to the red font. So I think it was areas that we had asked the architect to go back and look at. So for example, this one here is, there are 2 classrooms at Whitford Middle School that were once bathrooms. So this would be looking at reverting those back to restrooms. So I think these are some items that we would ask the architect to go back and get
More
additional
clarification.
information.
So it's not, I mean, the key at the top does just reference the yellow, gray.
I think when we actually started, when we went over this first time with the architect, they were taking notes, so I think this was
Something they might have noted after this.
correct. So HVAC, mixing valves, eye wash station. Again, some of this, so here's another example of the eye wash station. That's work that, you know, is low hanging fruit. But again, by putting it on there, it's important, but it also qualifies as for reimbursement. And so if you were to, so and then when you start talking about reimbursement, as Amy was talking about, you can start packaging something together. So if you were to do something that's an educational enhancement along with health and safety, and you bundle those two items together, you actually would get a 5% bonus for health and safety on the educational enhancement and vice versa. So that's where it starts to, you start to think more strategically on how to maximize bonuses.
Also on stage 2, so if you since the district is submitting stage 2 in February of 24 and receiving approval in May of 24, the district has until 2029 to complete the entire stage. 50%.
And then we have more panel boards, so some electrical work. In the generator at Wickford, there is a generator. It's in the reduce. So those are our 1s and 2s at Wickford.
Mike, the Woodford work that you listed out, is Ride gonna look at that and say, wait a minute, the plan is to close Woodford Middle? Why are you putting in, or is this work that has to be done before we get to the point of consolidating schools?
So I think if we have a plan to consolidate the schools, I think you're gonna have to ask questions as to what work needs to be done.
Right.
Does it make sense to put a 30-year roof on a building that may not
Be here, but
But you have to, the district has to maintain the buildings until that happens. So if it happens 2 years or 3 years down the road, you still have to maintain and keep the schools operational, safe, secure, warm, safe, and dry. So.
And also, hopefully it's not the case, but if the bond doesn't pass, if we don't include this, we wouldn't get reimbursed, right?
Seems like the list of 1s and 2s for Wickford is way more extensive than pretty much everywhere else. So, all the more reason, right?
And we know that the number is skewed for the ventilation right out of the gate, because if we got a quote for $3.2 million, when they originally had a budget of $1.6 million, 1.4, somewhere in that range.
And that wasn't just a quote, that was
So that
competitive bid.
Yeah, competitive bid process came in at 3.2 million. So it was just about double what they originally had given us for a budget.
And just for a point, something that I'm thinking this way, so in case others are, and we can use this as we're out in the general public. 1s and 2s on Woodford add up to approximately $14 million. So should the bond not pass, that's $14 million of work that we still have to spend on Woodford Middle School. So by passing the bond, there's potential of eliminating $14 million of costs. That's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
And so
And that's just for your 1s and 2s.
that's right.
And again, along those lines, pretty much everything on this list, 1 through 5, are all their capital improvements. So they're not necessarily improving the educational facility; they're fixing what's wrong with it. It's still a building that has the same size classrooms that were built in 1930. So there's a lot of benefits to looking at a new school, just pumping a lot of money into a school that's functioning.
so all in all, if you add everything together, you're talking, it says $24.2 million of repairs, things that need to be done eventually.
And I don't, is that factoring in the escalations? Yes, it is. Yeah.
And same applies here.
And now on to
So
DMS.
you add these two together.
So DMS, I think this is a typo. This 2131 is just my compilation. These are ones. So DMS, our one issue is roof exhaust fans and building ventilation. And for 2s, we have ADA accessibility. Building management controls. Exhaust exhaust hoods at the life skills room. IT cooling, again, this is all part of the HVAC work, so you've got a number of HVAC items on here. Existing card panels, that's an electrical panel. Replacement of the generator. And more electrical panels. So those are our ones and twos.
What's the total at the bottom?
DMS is 15.
So we got, what, $40 million just for those two buildings?
So from here, we see where according to this assessment, where the priorities should be for our capital improvement plan. But obviously, of course, we can't just put everything on, right? So we need to, think of this strategically of cost as well, of as we build a 5-year plan, how we're going to fund these projects. So in looking at it, obviously, the ones are the ones you want to put out there first. But I think we also looking at the ones that are on roofs. You can't do all the roofs all at the same time. We have to look at the difference of the schools. Obviously, we're going to put priority on the schools that we know that we want to keep open, and then also looking at the items on here that are too. So it's all health and safety renovations that we're making. Mostly everything on here are building envelope or HVAC. And then I would suggest as a task of all of the committee members to review the facilities assessment. Are there any threes that we believe that we should also be looking at? I know looking at fives or something that we could do within our facilities department. We wouldn't have to be going out and bringing in contractors to do that type of work, but it is looking at the ones and twos and possibly some of those things.
And I know when we were talking today, there's other opportunities that so one item that we didn't talk about today, because it's not necessarily deficiency, but it's an education enhancement, is in looking at the D building. Electric Boat has interested in doing some programming there. So that is something that we would put on our capital plan so to receive the reimbursement. So that's an education enhancement that we think is really important for our kids.
So as far as the role of the building committee, we want to include all of this in our stage 2 in order to get reimbursement, right?
Well, right. So if you don't, whatever you don't put in, you have to get reimbursement.
Right.
But we also have to consider that cost, and that we have to make sure that at least 50% of the projects that are approved are approved over 5 years.
So is it number of projects or is it
I think it's
dollars?
cost. It's the cost.
Wow.
So obviously with this.
So you can't put all the roofs on there, right?
But if the middle school is completed, and I'm going to ask this question, I by no means make it as a statement. So if the middle school costs the $167 million, and we put, I don't have the tally off my head, $20 million worth of roofs on it, just by completing the middle school, we will have completed more than 50% of the project. So we could, with completion of the middle school, it does give us a little more. Am I understanding that right? Gives us a little more flexibility to put some extra projects on there that should money become available, we can get the reimbursement on.
So the next part is.
No, you're correct with that, because with what you're saying, because if looking at the cost of what it would be to build the middle school, right? And then looking at the cost of these other projects, we would strategize what it is that we put on there, so that way, if it's approved by RIDE, you're getting reimbursement for the work that we can't do.
And we'll know before we submit whether or not we have a middle school, which is great. It's better than what we were doing in September. So it makes it a lot easier to.
So that's a good point. So now, Matt, there's a question: should the bond pass? It would be smart of us to include everything on Davisville and Whitford in our stage 2, because that's going to help us meet the 50% threshold.
Well, we wouldn't have to necessarily.
No, we wouldn't. So if the bond passes, we wouldn't necessarily put everything from DMS, and we figure out next week, we would have to do all of that work, but we would wanna consider all of the other pieces.
Everything else, but
I guess
DMS.
my point is that.
Because there's also work that has to, so when you submit stage two, and maybe you can talk about this, if we're saying we have to do a roof in stage two, isn't there a little bit of schematic design work? So there'd be some costs to putting everything.
I guess my argument with RIDE, and again, please tell me if I'm way off base. My argument with RIDE is that if our stage two submission called for $20 million of improvements to Wickford Middle School and Davis Middle School combined, $20 million, and we built a brand new middle school, haven't we in theory accomplished that $20 million expenditure? That's my argument with them. But
I don't know if they would see it the same
Yeah,
way
I
as
don't
you're
see-
seeing
there's
it,
not
because I see what you're
benefit to
saying,
that.
like, we built middle school, so we accomplished having
So
to
there's a.
give them,
We don't
give
need
a
a new
roof and all
Yeah,
this,
that's
so
what
we
we
have
got
to
to do
spend
some
that
pressure.
money.
We got a new roof on a new middle school.
Right, I don't know if they would see it that way,
Okay.
the way they're looking at it is, you have the funds in there to build a new middle school, right? That which, if that's approved by the bond, and that was accepted, so that is a large percentage of the project cost to be completed. If we do put items on there for DMS and Wickford Middle, and we don't get to it, it would be okay, because we already hit the 50%, over 50% of what the total cost is.
So let's say everything on the sheet adds up to 150 million.
Right.
So let's say we put everything on there,
Right.
and the school comes in at 167. We will have hit 50% of what we asked just by completing the middle school.
But the middle school wasn't on there, that's why we're losing money.
No, the middle school,
No,
it's
it
not
will
a
be.
capital improvement
Building
plan, but
a
it's
new
part of our
school.
stage two submission.
So the stage two submission will be this plus the middle school. You got it.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's good.
There's one
Thank you.
caveat in terms of putting in all the projects, you have to substantiate the CAP funds. So you will have to show that if you're not bonding for the value, you have to show that you will have the funds to back that up. So you can't put infinite amount of projects.
Mhm.
I guess that's a little bit of a.
Yep.
Right.
Is there, because I know the way we do the town CIP, is there restrictions on funding sources? So a lot of times we'll put, budget, grant funding, surplus, other. I would think that the restrictions on a stage two are much different than the town. We have a lot more flexibility than the school does. So what are the funding sources that we can use in the stage two application?
You can use capital fund. So the funding sources is the bonding, the capital fund, capital reserve.
Couldn't use grant or anything like that, or,
Grants are questionable. We can discuss that.
okay.
It depends.
Is there some grades and the source
Certain grants.
you do not get the reimbursement?
Yeah, that's true too. That's a good point.
So there's some grants and then there's some,
That, like I said, it's a lot different with the town. We were talking reimbursements, that's a good point.
also say, $167 million is for the middle school, but let's say that we come up with it becomes $140 million, for instance, and there's 20 million in the bond, potentially that could be also applied towards anything else within, if you have that approval. You cannot do something that's not on there. So if you have every school and you have a little bit from every school, that's really good, because then you can basically do something in that school. Of course, you have to submit a schematic design for every little thing, but there is a way to do it more efficiently. So there are ways to put a lot of information into the submission and then see what can be done as long as you do the 50%.
But does the bond say that it's only for middle school, or is the bond language, I can't remember what it says, is it pretty,
Very
very general? Okay.
It does allow us for any funding that's not going into the construction of the middle school for us to put at other sites.
And the council will have, the final authority has to have that money spent, but it's, the bond council made it very general. As a matter of fact, I think it's actually language in improvements to other schools, putting that bond language.
So our next steps is to prioritize these items and organize them into a capital improvement plan, what year they will be completed, ensuring that the projects that we put in, we can guarantee we have the funds for.
And you don't want to do that until after February. You want to start working on it now.
I want us to start working on that, because I think it's important that we start considering what other work needs to be done within the district, and we're gonna need that to sync with our FY '25 budget.
But the November 8th results would have a significant impact as to what we decide, right?
So we're just trying to get it ahead and have these open conversations, saying that we just,
I'm sorry, 7. Okay, that's helpful.
saying that we also recently received the
Yeah, don't
assessment, and we haven't had a chance to put it on the agenda. You know, there were questions about the capital improvement plan, and we wanted to put this out there, and then we are in the process of looking at it, and that this committee is.
This was very helpful.
Any questions for anyone? Any questions from the public?
About everything or just this?
It would be on this agenda item.
Well, about PAR, so I heard a little reluctance. Yeah.
And just state your
Yeah,
name.
I'm Bob Vanderslice, resident of North Kingstown at 151 Prospect. I heard some reluctance from the engineer at PAR to do soil and water testing as part of phase 1, because it's a little bit of wasted money. It won't count necessarily for the phase 2 assessment, but that seems like a good investment to me, because you're gonna get some information right away on your concern. What if the whole property is really contaminated, we have to do a lot of work? So you're gonna get some initial data. I would encourage him, when he's doing those initial borings, to see the structure of the fill, and when they're doing a few test pits, to go ahead, take a couple samples. And that way, when you hit that public meeting, you'll have some information to share. So by September 18th, I think that was the date of your public meeting, you're already gonna know a fair amount at the site. You won't know everything, but that would seem good to do.
Just so we don't have a date yet for the public meeting.
Right, but that seemed like the time, and in order to get data, laboratory data on water and soil samples, you had better test them soon. Right? So when they're doing those borings under phase 1, they're going to do much more complete testing under phase 2, but that's going to be after your public meeting, and you won't have that information until then. You'll have it before the vote. So I would encourage a little testing as part of phase 1. You sort of alluded to it, but I didn't understand exactly what it was. And then with respect to all those security measures at the schools. So I've been substituting in all North Kingstown schools. It's about as welcoming as going to TSA at the airport. And it's going to get worse, I would guess, with this new security arrangement. But if you just go into any of the cafeterias, they are very welcoming. They have these beautiful murals and stuff. And I don't know if anybody's thought about how to make these very secure, and they aren't secure now. So congratulations, good that you're going to do that. Is there any way to make them pleasant and welcoming to the parents and kids as they walk into the school? So
I can say that yes, that's
good.
possible, and
Okay.
I've just got my experience in Jamestown and the work we do
Yeah.
there of like what you put in that area for people as
Thank
they're
you.
waiting.
And thank you very much for what must be a thankless task. So,
Thank you.
those are
Thank
all.
you.
So I'm just going to go on to the next agenda item, which is our next meeting date. Amy, do we want to? I know we went through some suggested meetings today.
I believe we discussed the next meeting date should be September 12th, because the 13th wasn't a good day, right? I thought a 13th, but I think 12th.
Yeah, because we were going through that and looking at open houses and
Open
everything.
house.
So I'm wondering if.
Yeah, are you really wrong?
I heard it. So why don't we maybe send an email out to the group of what our goal is to get meetings booked from now through November, and we're looking at pretty much almost every other week to have a meeting if possible. Just knowing the work that we have to do and coming in opposite of school committee. So we'll work on that.
When's our school committee?
So our next school committee meeting is September 5th, but we're going to have the following week, right? That would be trying to get a building.
So the school committee is the 5th, and then again on the 12th?
The 12th would be a building.
Okay, the school committee probably
Then
the
the
19th.
following week.
pick a time.
Sometime
Sometime after the 5th or before the 19th?
exactly, right, I guess. And even like when we're looking at, the dates that she put together, we would know some conflicts with houses that are coming up. I just don't wanna have, meetings scheduled when there's other things going on in the district.
This is you're doing that 11th is a council meeting.
11th, there is a council meeting.
12th, I have a
November
conflict.
15th.
After that's not to be 13th, 14th, but 11th.
We're trying to line everything up earlier. Now the schools are open.
Plus 11 and 25, and the 23rd.
We have council meeting the 11th and the 25th, yes.
We had those dates listed. We're trying to get dates for public forums and everything. So maybe what we'll do is, if we can, we'll look at those dates again maybe tomorrow at some point. Maybe we can't even just through email or a quick phone call and get something out to the committee with the dates.
I will update what I sent today, and I'll include Ms. Valver, and then I'll put everything together, and then we'll see if anything, any conflicts, we'll add those in.
So,
Motion to adjourn?
second. Everyone in favor on that?
No, let's stay. I've never seen a great motion fail yet.
On that,